Hello and welcome to Sunny Simple Living, where today we're going to talk about how much it actually costs really to live off the grid. So if you're here and you can see me, please hit like or let me know something, so I'm sure it's working right. If we haven't met yet, I'm Sandrine and I live off the grid in Spain. My husband Axel and I, we have 3.5 hectares, a little bbit more, and that is about 10 acres. And we have olive trees and almond trees, and we have alpacas and chickens and all that stuff. We also have a bed and breakfast that is usually open mostly from spring till autumn. It's not open right now. It's winter. It's far too cold for people to go on holiday. So I'm just going to check here if I can see what's happening, because I'm not getting anything back, like any. So let's just check on my phone. I'll be able, because I really want to interact with you if possible. So if you're here, tell me you're here. I'm not seeing anything right now, so I just want to test that. And let me know where you are. Do you actually live off the grid? And if you're not living off the grid, do you have plans to live off the grid maybe? If you are living off the grid, where do you live? I'd love to know all about you, because all the questions you asked in the chat and everything, I like to use them as I go, basically. So yeah, if you give me just a tiny minute, then I'm going to fix this little technical thing. And we should be right back with you. Sorry about that. Yeah, so those are 10 really long seconds. Sorry about that. Now, today we're going to talk about what it actually costs to live off the grid. And I'm not going to name any numbers, like I'm not going to say it's going to cost you 100 euros to do this and 50 euros to do this, because that is really different for everyone. Basically, the thing I've come up with is that the cost of living off the grid is different. It depends from person to person, of course, and it depends on 3 things mainly. It depends on what you're doing off the grid. So are you trying to be completely self-sufficient? Are you going out for dinner every day? That kind of things. It also depends on your initial investments. So the more money you put into it initially, like the better your system, that kind of thing, the more seed you bought before you even started your garden, that kind of thing, the less it's going to cost you on the long run, of course. Also, yeah, are you willing to compromise? Like, it's really cheap to live in a tiny tent somewhere in the woods, but are you willing to do that? So I'm really not. We live in, I wouldn't say a conventional house. I think our house is really huge, but still it's more conventional than, yeah, I don't know. So if you're living off the grid, let me know what kind of house you're living in. And thank you, Summer. You live in Arkansas. I didn't know that. That's the other side of, yeah, it's in the US. And this is why I'm doing this. Normally I go live in the morning at 9 o'clock in Spain, but everybody in the US is still sleeping. So somebody asked me, couldn't you do it in the afternoon just for once? I might do it more than once. So that's how people in the US can see me as well now. So yeah, let's talk about, I'm going to go over all the different things you have to take into account when you live off the grid and you could be spending money on. I'm not guaranteeing that you're going to spend a lot of money on it. I'm not guaranteeing you're going to spend any money, but just those are things it's good to know that it costs maybe more than you would have thought it costs. So first of all, there's, of course, it's the general cost of living. It's the groceries, it's clothes, and they are basically often lower than if you wouldn't be living off the grid, especially if you're living a bit more remotely. You're probably going to plan your meals better. You're going to need less fancy clothes to go out and things like that. So you are going to spend a little less money on just day-to-day things. Also, going out, for instance. I remember I lived in Amsterdam and we would go to the movies at least once a week. Nah, maybe not at least, but then we would go out for dinner and that kind of thing. Well, we don't do that as often here. It's we went to see Star Wars about a few weeks ago for my husband's birthday. birthday, and that was a big trip. That was 1.5 hours to go to a theater that would actually show things in original version instead of dubbed Spanish. So we need to drive to the coast for that. So that's one thing. The general cost of living could actually go down. However, there's other things you will be spending money on, and lots of other things. First thing I'm thinking about right now is animals. Lots of people start out and think, oh, I'm going to grow to raise animals, and I'm going to eat eggs from the chickens, maybe even raise a pig to have meat, or have a cow for milk, that kind of thing. It is expensive. It's not like that's going to save you any money in the short run, definitely. Because if you have chickens, you're going to spend money on their housing. And you can spend very little money on their housing, but will you have a chicken coop that is protected from foxes or, well, whatever the predators are, like that can be martyrs, or if you're in the US, it's coyotes maybe. So that's a really big thing. Housing for animals costs a lot, and fencing especially, it's amazing. We think, oh, it's only this much a meter or whatever, but it's a lot of meters you have to cover if you have bigger animals, especially if you need bigger fences. If you have goats are so good at escaping. You really want strong fences for them. So take that into account and make a real count of that. Don't think, oh, the animal is going to cost me this much and this much for the vet and this much for food. So yeah, and a few €100 for fences. That is not the case. Fencing is definitely more than a few €100. Depending on what you have, of course. So that's animals, food. Also animals, like we thought with our alpacas, they're going to graze the land. We're not going to spend a lot of money on food for them. They need a bit of supplements, but usually they're quite okay. They're really easy to care for and everything. Well, there's vet costs and chipping and vaccinations and stuff. But apart from that, we thought they would be quite cheap. However, it has rained so little this year that we had to buy hay every few weeks probably. So that was something we didn't account for totally a bit. It was in the back of our minds that could actually happen. So animals. Next thing we are spending a lot of money on still is technical stuff like permits and little engineers and taxes and that kind of thing that we didn't really expect, because it's really difficult to really know what is going on here in Spain. It's really different depending on the different communities, the different villages even. Like a neighboring village here really wants you to apply for one certain license every time you have you want to build like a stable or something. It's really cheap to apply for it. It's really quick. You just pay something to the ayuntamiento, to town hall, and that's it. However, exactly the same thing in our village is completely different. Like you have to talk to people and they will decide on what you need exactly. And so yeah, it really depends a bit, but those are things we lose not only money but time on as well. Like we have been living in here for we've been living in Spain for 4 years almost, but we've been living in this house for 1.5 years, almost 2 years actually, and we're still getting things like our house is nowhere near signed off. It will still cost us lots of time. And every time there's somebody who needs to sign a paper, that's money going out. There's somebody who needs to come and check on something and give you a permit or give you a license, that's money going out. So yeah, you spend a lot of money on that. So next on the list is your systems. So we talked about those a bit last week when we talked about budget, and they're, like Summer says, they are so expensive. They are expensive. However, they are getting cheaper every year, which is good. They are also getting better every year. Like every year they're getting greener and it costs less to produce them. And they are getting sturdier as well, if I get it right. So let's see if, when we moved here, my husband said, could you wait like 2 years until we buy the solar panels, because they're going to get so much better. Well, we didn't wait. However, the thing with solar panels and with everything system-wise is the more money you spend on it when you just start, the less money you'll spend on it on the long run. or even on the short run, actually, because there's lots of people who live off the grid here, so I have lots of chances to compare and to see how other people set up their systems. And you notice, yeah, the smaller the system, the more often you have to put on your generator, for instance. And every time you use that generator, that's gas going out. And for us, buying gas, petrol, whatever you want to call it, is just money you're throwing away. So that's why we chose to have somewhat of a bigger system, so we would have less bills, yeah, apart from that. So all of our electricity is completely on solar, and that's really nice to have. Also, for instance, water, we have everything well incorporated in the house. We have our own water from our own well, but if you have to bring in water, for instance, that's going to cost you. Even if you are going to get it yourself from a spring somewhere, it still costs to have all the materials, the pump and things like that, to get it to your house. So that's, yeah, there's maintenance for your off-grid systems as well, of course. And there as well, the better your systems, the less maintenance you will have, the less they will fail, hopefully, if you had them installed well and everything. Also, it's not only a money thing, so it's also the better you are on it. So the more you are actually proactive and looking into your system, making sure everything's running smoothly. My husband, really, Axel, is really good at that. Sometimes he'll go and check everything like at least once a week, just to make sure everything is running smoothly and we don't get any nasty surprises. That is good, because if you wait until things break down, that's often more expensive, of course. Yeah, because there's lots of people, like you will get a pump for your water well, and then the pump is not quite strong enough, or the filter is not quite right, or there's no filter, and before you know it, you've been pumping up water for a year and the pump is broken already because there's too much dirt in it, things like that. That's a really common problem around here. People just buy pumps that are too small for what they need to do, or they just don't filter the water well enough before it gets into the pump. We'll probably do something more technical with Axel, because I'm not a technical person. But if you want to know more about all that kind of stuff, let me know, and I'll try and get Axel in front of the camera one of the following weeks to talk to you about systems and about technical stuff. Next, yeah, we've just looked at systems. The more you invest in systems up front, the less they will cost you as you go along. Now, next is transportation. That is a really big one, as it costs a lot, basically. We live off the grid, so we live not really close to anything, and going to the shop, going to buy something every time, that costs, well, it's just a few euros every time, but if you count it all up, it's a lot of money. So that's something we really had to learn, to not go to Big Mat, which is a local big building store, to not drive there every time we needed a screw or something, and so we try to really group our groceries, group everything we have to. So we have one day planned where we go to town. Well, usually we go to town a bit more often, but still we try to plan it as much as possible, and that way we can save a lot of money. And not only money, time as well, because it's just, every time you just pop over to town, it's only 20 minutes, 15 minutes even from here, but it's still, yeah, you lose an hour just leaving, going there, coming back. So it's something completely different from in Amsterdam. We used to live, there were 3 supermarkets, like real supermarkets, within 5 minutes walk from our apartment. It was really convenient, and we would decide like, oh, tonight we're eating this, we would just pop over to the store and come back, and an hour later dinner would be on the table. Well, we don't have that here, but we've got lots of other things which are even better, of course. Now, next on my list is the costs of having a business. Because when we moved here, we decided to start a business as well, and that was a kind of a big surprise to us as well. Some mistakes were made as well. So we made some mistakes. Other people made some mistakes. And we are spending quite a lot of money just on having a business. Our business is our bed and breakfast, so it does make us some money as well. But like in winter, between yeah, now we closed a few weeks ago. We closed in the beginning of January, and we're reopening about half March. So that's 2 months without income, and we still pay over 500 euros every month just to have a business, which I think is quite expensive. I'm a virtual assistant as well, and my business is in the Netherlands, as I was living in the Netherlands in Amsterdam when I started out as a virtual assistant. And having my business there doesn't cost me anything at all. So it's a big difference. So yeah, the costs of having a business is not only, well, the things like the accountant and the autonomo they have here. So it's not the monthly things. It's also, as a business, you will probably need more permits, more licenses, more little things. So, and that is costing us money as well, of course. Some things need to be checked extra, like our water will need to be checked like 10 times before we might or might not get a license to give that as showering water to our guests. Yeah, all that kind of things. So last but not least on my list is the garden. And there I'm going back to what I said in the beginning. Most of your recurring costs will depend on 3 things. So it's what you're doing there, your initial investment, and what you're happy to compromise on. So, and there the garden is a perfect example. For instance, if you are going to set up your garden completely in the beginning, you get raised beds, you bring soil in from elsewhere, you buy all the best organic seeds and everything, you're going to maybe install irrigation even, or just make sure there's enough water for all summer. And that way you're going to have a great garden, unless things happen like you get hail in August or something, that happens. But still, you're going to have an awesome garden. If you put that much into it, you're going to get at least something out of it. And it's different, of course, if you decide to keep the budget a bit lower when you start, you're going to have costs as you go along. For instance, if your vegetables are not perennial and not organic, you might need to buy seeds every year. You might want to build up your soil as well, like to keep your compost and that kind of thing. So it will take a few years before you actually have a garden. And then the question is, do you want a garden in order to be self-sufficient, or you just want a flower garden? That's going to make a big difference when it comes to costs as well. Because a flower garden, it's pretty and I love it. But most flowers, well, at least some flowers are not really useful. There's so many useful flowers as well, companion plants that will that will attract like beneficial insects and things. There's edible flowers, of course. So you can have a flower garden with just beneficial flowers, but when I'm talking about a real vegetable garden, I'm talking about a garden that you can plant and live on basically year round. And we have some friends around here who have all vegetables from their garden year round, but they have made a huge investment for that. So that is a big choice to make. Like, do you want the initial investments? Are you going to spend a lot of money on it in the beginning, or are you going to spend some money on it as you go? And that is, well, we've chosen the second way. So every year we try to improve our garden a tiny bit, but every year I spend quite some money on seeds, and we buy a few new trees. And like trees, they're really cheap. I mean, around here, it's, yeah, for 5 to 10 euros, you have a young tree. But you'll have a young tree that will need a few years to grow. And also one tree might just be 5 euros. But if you need 10 trees or maybe 100 trees, depends on how much you have to plant, it might get quite expensive. So if you are living on off the grid and you are here in the chat, let me know, what are you actually spending money on more than you thought? I went around with exactly that question. I asked that to lots of our friends, and like, yeah, the big answer I got, like several said fencing and like protecting animals. It's not only fencing, but sometimes it's just making sure, like digging in stuff, and yeah, it's making sure the foxes don't get to it, or in one case the eagle doesn't get to it. Well, more than one case actually. But other friends said, oh, we're spending so much money on eating out here. And that is basically because eating out around here is, when you compare it to many other countries, eating out here is pretty cheap. So some people tend to do it more often. We don't do it as often as we used to do it in Amsterdam because we just did it a lot. But yeah, it's something that we spend more money on than we had expected to. It's still a really fun thing to spend money on though, because food around here can be pretty good. So yeah, I went through my whole list of what we are actually spending money on. Now, what we are not spending much money on, there's those things as well. So I told you in the beginning about how clothing got so much cheaper. I actually gave away most of my wardrobe because I had so many fancy city clothes, and there's really nothing I can do with all of them here. So like sometimes you go to town or something, but you don't need 20 outfits for that. Well, I used to work in the cities. You need more than 20 outfits if you want to wear something different every day. So clothes is one thing you're spending less money on, usually if you live off the grid. It's also, you don't buy unnecessary stuff as much. So you might see things on Amazon. If you're an online shopper, you might have a bit of a thing with it, but still, in our case, shopping on Amazon is a little more complicated than it used to be, or I say Amazon, it can be any shop, of course. They used to be just one click on the button and they would deliver the day after. It would be on our doorstep. While here it's a bit difficult for it to get here, and sometimes things get lost or we have to pick it up like 2 towns away and things like that. So, oh yeah, Summer said animal feed is their greatest expense. So what kind of animals do you have, Summer? Yeah, I know you have the brown pig, right? So yeah, and I do get animals are really a lot more expensive. That's what everybody says around here as well. Animals are so much more expensive than what you'd expect. So you often get animals from people for free. Like we have a couple of friends who got given, I think in the course of a few years, they got given like 10 or 15 goats. But those animals cost a lot of money, and if they're not getting pregnant, they're not getting giving any milk, and you're not getting what you wanted out of it. So it's always good before you get animals to calculate what are they going to cost us, worst case scenario. What is the fencing going to cost us? Usually once the fencing is up, and if you maintain your fencing well, so if you make sure there's no holes in it or things get fixed, and it goes like when it rains, something is wonky, you can fix it right away, and that's a lot better than just waiting for it to completely flood away. So yeah, animals cost a lot more than anyone would expect. But I was talking about what is costing us less. So well, we're spending a lot less on groceries. Because we have meal plans now. We are going to the shop less often, and we really have a list of what we need to buy. I know some people who live 1 hour away from the shop, not right here, but they're internet friends of mine. And that is really, if you're 1 hour away from the shop, you don't even go once a week. You may be going once every 2 weeks or something, but usually you'll just go once a month, and you'll have a huge list of what you need, and the rest you'll just try and grow yourself. But as I was just saying, for growing things yourself, you'll need the investments of buying seeds, and sometimes harvest just won't go well, or not just harvest, but growing things like you. Last year, I sowed 200 tomatoes, over 200 tomatoes, and I got exactly 2 tomatoes. So everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And I have explanations for some of it, and other things just were like, yeah, things really went wrong with my tomatoes last year. We had lots of other things, but no tomatoes. And there the question is, do you want to compromise on it? Are you just accepting, well, this summer we won't have any tomatoes? Or do you say, well, I like tomatoes and it's tomato season, so I could just as well go to the shop and buy myself a big bunch of tomatoes, not too expensive because it's tomato season, and I can still make tomato sauce for all of winter and things like that. So that is basically what we're spending less money on. Yeah, and as I mentioned in the beginning, things like going out as well. It's not a daily thing, it's not a weekly thing. And when we go out, it's usually to see friends around here, so we don't spend much money on that. We just bring something to eat and drink. And yeah, here in this area at least, food and drinks are quite a lot cheaper than elsewhere where I've lived. It's even cheaper than at the coast, actually. So for people living at the coast in Spain, it's nice because you have the sea, but it's probably a bit more expensive as well. It's also nice because more people speak English. So for some people who come from abroad and who come to Spain to live here, it might be a good idea to just go where more people speak the language if you don't want to learn Spanish. Although I would just say, if you don't want to learn Spanish, don't move to Spain, of course. So these are basically the things I had on my list, and I'm really happy with other people who contributed here as well. If you have anything you would like to ask me about living off the grid, about what we're spending our money on, about what we're doing, anything like that, feel free to ask us. Next week, I would love to make a video about our heating system, about how we heat our house. Yeah, it's, I don't know if you can see it like this. Yeah, it's not pretty, but that's our stove. It's not quite well built in yet. We basically heat our house as much as possible in winter using our wood stove. We also have, so that wood stove will heat up a big water tank, and that way the radiators will get hot and that kind. So that's what I would like to talk about next week. I'll go into the details of that. And like you see, it's a nice and sunny day here at the moment. So a lot has been, well, it's a lot warmer because the sun has been on the windows all day, and this is a really nice warm room with lots of windows. But still, we need our wood stove, and I'm going to talk about that, about heating next week. So if there's nothing else until then, I will talk to you next week. I hope this helped a bit. And if you have any questions about the costs of living off the grid, feel free to answer. I'll go through the chat later and say hi and answer all of your questions. For now, have a really good week, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.